So welcome. Today we have our first interview with one of our presenters at the conference next year, Peter. It's a delight to see you online. Thank you for joining us today. Very much looking forward. I was just reading about your presentation again, and I thought, oh, shall I just throw out all the questions and we just immerse ourselves and see what happens? And then thought, maybe not, because it's fair to ask similar questions of all the presenters, but do tell us a bit more about yourself and your presentation at the conference.
Okay, well, hello, Karen. Hello, everybody watching. So about myself, well, I've been in and around NLP since about 1993, so coming up on 20 years, learning it and innovating in the field and teaching. I'm a master trainer now with the Society of NLP, the Christina Hall side, and I'm a member of the NLP Leadership Summit, which is a group of experienced NLP trainers from around the world, and I run NLP training in the UK online now, obviously, Hong Kong and anywhere else I can get to, really. So India and Europe and all over the place. And most of the work I do is actually in businesses. So mostly I'm doing leadership and management development, executive coaching, also publishing. And then, a few times a year, public NLP training, more with a business professional focus. So definitely away from a therapeutic focus is my sort of area of expertise, and do that a few times a year. The last 18 months has been extremely busy with that, because obviously everyone's gone online and looked for something to do for their own development, so that's been busy, and I'm looking forward to continuing that at the conference next year.
And your presentation is curiously entitled "The Magic Canvas of Projective Coaching."
Yes.
What does that mean?
Well, the idea behind projective coaching, it's derived a lot, or has a lot in common with projective psychology. And one of the things that we know from studying NLP, or the model of NLP, is that each human being, each intelligent animal really, builds their own subjective map of the outside world based solely on the sum total of their life experience. And so your brain physically is a map of your life experience. The connections in your brain are made as a result of the stimulus that the outside world has presented to your senses. And so we know that the NLP works on sensory systems and changing and recoding sensory patterns of information that we call life, and that we call life experience, and that we call reality, and that we call bad things that happen and good things that happen, and sad times and happy memories and all of that. So if we go down to the kind of the basic level of what the brain's doing, we know that the brain is building this subjective map, and we know that everybody has a different life experience and therefore a different map. But through this shared set of symbols that we call language, we can interact enough between those maps. There's enough overlap that we can kind of communicate and work together in teams and achieve complex tasks and have our needs met and all that other important social stuff. But if we take that a step further, we're not only passively receiving information from the outside world and building a map, we're then projecting that map back out onto the physical world, and we are changing the physical world in our own image. So for example, if you look in your kitchen cupboards, or you look on your desk, your workspace, you'll find everything organized in exactly your way and no one else's. And if you go to somebody else's house and you're trying to find the tea bags or whatever, and you're thinking, why would they put them there? Or you look at somebody else's desk and you think, how can they work like this? Because it's much less or much more organized than yours would be. How can they find anything? That sort of thing. So we shape our outside environment, and then when we're living with and working with other people, they all kind of bump into each other, and we get sort of territorial conflict over where things are supposed to be, and how the where things are supposed to be kept at work or in the kitchen or whatever. So the idea that we're creating this reality by projecting that internal map outwards now into the physical world, we can then use that to get an insight into how people are constructing their reality. And the idea of the magical canvas is, if you give somebody a blank canvas, whatever they put on it will be a self-portrait.
Right.
And not a literal drawing a picture of themselves, but whatever they put will be a form of self-expression. And the self-expression is the self is the important part. Is so whatever your current frame of mind is, your attitudes, your preconceptions, your preferences, your likes, dislikes, your emotional state at a particular time will come out. And so the whole idea of projective coaching is that we can create lots of different ways that we can interact with a client in that way. Lots of different tools and methods for interacting with that subjective experience of the client, which then allows us to reveal and discover and kind of bring to the surface a whole lot of hidden stuff that's going to be very valuable then for the client in achieving change or achieving results in their lives, whatever it is they're asking you to help them with.
And that's really interesting, because you said hidden stuff, and what you're saying is it's hidden stuff, but actually it's there. We can all see it. I'm looking at my desk now and thinking, oh crikey, because the messages are there.
Exactly. And your just as your brain is a sum total of your life experience so far, your physical environment that you've created, if that's your room, nobody else is in there moving stuff about. Everything that's in that room is where you put it, and everything that's in that room is there because you chose to put it there. I remember many years ago reading a wonderful website about marketing and the way that psychology and subliminal messaging and so on in marketing. And it showed these old adverts from the 1970s. People are sitting around drinking, it's advertising some alcoholic drink, and people are sitting around. And basically who is making eye contact with who is all meticulously stage managed. Even the time on the clock and the colors and the shape, everything that's in there. And the point in the article, which really fascinated me at the time, was that this thing is created. A photographer didn't just wander into a bar and take a photo. They created this scene in a studio, and so everything that's in the image was put there with intent to influence.
Wow.
And if we extend that thinking to our own lives, everything that's on your desk, that's in your car, everything is put there with an intention behind it, and that intention is communicating something to anybody who has the inclination and perhaps the ability to listen.
So what will delegates take away from your session at the conference then? Because I'm already excited.
Well, a couple of layers, I suppose. We're gonna practice a number of different projective techniques that will involve using photographs, using drawing. I haven't decided yet which ones we're going to experiment with, but we're going to experiment with some really simple projective tools and techniques. So you'll have some very practical tools that you can take away and work with a client, because I think particularly if you're coaching, and particularly if you've got coaching training, it can be very cognitive, very logical, very rooted in language, listening to the client, asking a question about what they just said, getting an answer. And this sequence of questions and answers can really kind of limit and constrain and narrow the conversation. And I'm imagining that the answer to a question that you'll hear most often from a client is, I don't know. And of course that can mean lots of different things, but it could mean that the client is unable or unwilling to put an answer into words. So they have an answer, but it isn't in the form of a nice, neat linguistic package. And so to have a way of interacting with clients that isn't bounded or constrained by language is very valuable. It's very powerful, and it's a lot of fun. It can inject a really different sort of perspective into the relationship with the client and free the coach up as well. So that's the first thing, is taking away the tools. And I think one of the challenges that we have whether, in NLP and coaching, in therapy and counseling, one of the really difficult things is taking yourself out of the conversation. Everybody must have had the experience of hearing a client describing a situation and thinking, wow, that's just like what happened to me, or wow, I feel exactly the same way. And of course, logically, you have no idea. You were not there in their place. You're hearing some words that you might distort and might describe your experience, but whatever you've experienced, that's nothing like it. It's not the same at all. But if you forget that, if you start to think the client and you know what they're experiencing, you know how they're feeling, and you know what's best for them, and you know what technique is going to work, and you know what the best question is going to be, you are imposing your subjective reality onto theirs. And in the client coach or client therapist relationship, the client is extremely susceptible to that, because they've entered into that relationship wanting you to influence them, but influencing them using their reality versus influencing using yours is a very different thing.
Exactly.
So what I find is that working more specifically with the subjectivity is interesting, because it makes the coach more aware of themselves and their own interpretations. So when the client looks at a particular color or a particular image and says, oh, that makes me feel X, or that makes me think of whatever, it becomes very obvious to the coach, who then thinks, oh, that's interesting, because that's not how I see it. But now, having become consciously aware of how I see it, I can now remove that from the conversation. So that's very powerful. And then I think the second layer is then an understanding of the principles of the projective style of working, because the tools that we're going to practice, obviously there's a book, there's a website with ideas and tools on that. They're just the tip of the iceberg. You in any situation that you're in, you can create your own projective canvas. You can create your own interactive projective experience for the client, given whatever materials that you've got at hand. I remember, got back in the early 2000s, having lunch with a client and using what was on the table as metaphors for what was happening with the client. And what I was doing was, so this is obviously a very NLP application, but I was using metaphors like clouds, clouds which obviously pass, dissipate, disappear, and so on. But I anchored the concept of the problem to the plate.
Right.
Knowing that at some point the waiter's going to come and take the plate away. He's going to clear the plates. And so when the waiter came and cleared the plates away, the guy said, oh, I just feel like, it's the weight's been lifted, or something along those lines. So I think it's understanding the deeper principles of how it's working that allows then the coach, the therapist, whoever, to improvise given what you've got. This isn't a limited set of, these are the techniques and this is what you've got to use. Think more of the tools and the techniques as a window into the deeper principles. And if you can incorporate those into your work, I think it just makes it a lot more fun and flexible for you.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think that fun element is really key, isn't it? And it does sound like it's something that can be played with and tested and checked out and what comes of it. And I think in an environment like the conference, especially, where everybody there will be NLP trained, so they really will be able to dive into experiencing that and what it means. So it sounds like a fantastic opportunity.
Well, it's interesting because I think one of the challenges I see for practitioners is they can very easily get themselves tied up in knots trying to figure out what the right technique is to use, as if there is such a thing. And this style of working is very much expansive. It's a joint exploration. It's a joint discovery of insights. It isn't about the client describes a problem or something they want to change, and the coach thinks, right, so there was this and there was a dissociation and there was a thing, so I'm going to use a perceptual positions, and that's the right technique and that's going to work. And then doing that technique and then thinking, oh, that's weird, it didn't work. And then the practitioner blames themselves often and thinks, oh, I must have done it wrong, or I chose the wrong technique. It's not the case at all. No technique ever works, because that would mean the practitioner is deciding how the client has to be at the end of the session. And it's not up for you to decide that. I think what's important, and certainly one of the principles I get across on my practitioner training, is, has the client moved forwards?
Yes.
Are they finished? Of course not. Nobody is. But have they moved forwards? Have they got different insights and perspectives? Is that valuable to them? Do they have some ideas about what they want to try next? So that the process of learning has moved forward, but we haven't solved anything. We haven't tied anything up with a bow, which I think is often what comes across in demonstrations as well. Trainer demonstrations. Here's a technique. Everything's neatly tied up with a bow. This person's now fine. But we don't see what happens afterwards, after they go back to the seat or leave the conference or whatever. So there's a bit of trickery involved. So I think it really helps to sort of reinforce that process of discovery. If we can just throw up a lot of information, and the client then has to figure out what to do with that, it helps us again to not impose our models and expectations onto the client.
Definitely. So you mentioned a book. So my question was going to be, is there anything that delegates can do beforehand to give them a deeper experience during your session?
Yeah, well, there's the projective.coach website. That is the domain name, projective.coach. And on there's some explanation of how it works. And there are some free, simple tools. There's a description of a lovely tool that I use a lot in all kinds of different situations, where you just get somebody to draw 3 circles, and then you can have a conversation about what they've drawn, and what you're looking at is the kind of structures, the patterns, because they put the pencil on the paper. No mark that they made on that paper was made by accident. They were in absolute control of every muscle in their body at the time that, so for example, they might draw a circle, but it isn't quite complete, or it's a bit too complete. It sort of overlaps at the edges. This sort of, I just drew it like that, because you didn't just draw it like that. You drew it with great precision, and there's intent, and therefore there's a message being communicated. So that's a fun one to try out. There's a projective image generator. So I have these decks of projective coaching cards, and what they are is photos. Sort of
oh, cute.
when she was little, and there's a cheetah.
Ooh.
What else? And fairground ride.
Oh, lovely.
So there's so in each deck there's 72 photos, and you can use them in a variety of ways. And so on the website there's a free image generator, and it will generate at random 3 images. And then below there's a selection of ideas of what you can then do with those. And it's interesting and fun just to have a play with that and see what comes of it. So that will certainly get you into the spirit of the exercises that we'll do in the session. I
shall check that out, and I'll make sure that projective.coach is the website. So we'll make sure that gets shared. So obviously, the conference next year, like this year's conference, is virtual rather than in person. You've been to our in-person, presented at the in-person conference before, and very well received it was too. So how are you planning to add value in a virtual environment next year?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It's tricky, because I think if the conference was in person, what I was going to do was print out some of these photos, have them printed as posters, and put them around the room, and have people going around and physically interacting with them, and that would have been fun. Obviously we can't do that, and I think I've certainly found this with the corporate training and the NLP training, that moving to online is a lot easier for the student and a lot more work for the trainer. I have to be much better organized and better prepared for online, but it's much more convenient for the students, as I say, just kind of turns up and watches and does whatever. So I think there'll be more online resources, because there'll certainly be some online tools that we'll be using during the session,
right?
And so to have access to those during the session, and then obviously afterwards, means everybody's got the tools then at hand, which is pretty much the same as if there was a handout and they took that away at the conference, which is what I've done when I've been there at the live conference in years gone by. I think a nice thing about the live conference is people can come up and chat at the end of the session, and people do, and that's nice. So I think it's important to follow up. There'll be a Q&A towards the end of the session, but not everybody wants or thinks of the questions they want to ask at that time. So the nice thing about the conference exam is that you've got, coffee breaks and people come up and chat, and and so I think it's important to replicate that. So I think I'll be doing some sort of Q&A process, or email me questions or something.
And that's the beauty of the conference app, because we use the same app as we use with the in-person conference, but of course that the app is there to encourage that conversation and community throughout the conference, as you'll know from previously attending, and that continues on for 6 months afterwards as well. So that's the joy for the presenters and the delegates, is that your when we've recorded your presentation, it'll be available for 6 months afterwards, and the delegates will continue to be able to ask questions, and those questions they think about afterwards, they can still do that for up to 6 months afterwards. So it's a fantastic opportunity to be able to do that. So
it is, and that's one of the wonderful things is, there are lots of limitations to this online medium, but one of the great things is if you're at the in-person conference, once it's gone, it's gone. Whereas, as you say, people being able to watch it, especially if if they were interrupted at the time, or if there's something they think I need to go back and listen to that again, that's very valuable. So there'll be that, and then obviously the session itself will be very interactive. There'll be lots of opportunity to practice, try out different tools, understand the deeper principles. So there'll be very practical and immediate takeaways from it. So I'd say that would be the main things.
I think it sounds like a huge amount. I'm really looking forward to it. So, I mean, we've said you've presented at the in-person conference. You're now presenting at the virtual conference next year, which we're delighted about. And what does the NLP conference mean to you? That there are many of them now, but this International NLP conference, what does it mean to you?
I think it's a wonderful opportunity for people from different walks of life, different cultures, different industries, different levels of knowledge and experience with the subject, to be united by an interest in this subject, which, at a time when there's so many bad things happen in the world, climate change and political turmoil and COVID, and we're at a time when I think that people need these sorts of skills, ideas, ways of thinking, probably more than ever. I guess everybody lives in a time of great change, because that's our nature, is to create change, I guess. But it just seems to me, more than any other time in my life, this seems to be the time when we can be making a huge difference. And one of the things that I tell my practitioner students at the end of the training is that with this set of skills that they now have, and that our viewers now have, you have the ability to leave everybody you ever meet in life in a better place than you found them. And that is a responsibility. It is a duty.
Yeah.
It's not something that you use only for your benefit. It's you have an interest that brought you into the subject, and then the training gives you then an ability and an interest, and that together for me is a responsibility. So I think to have people, I think one of the downsides obviously of the physical conference is not everybody could afford to travel to London to get there. So now to make that far more accessible, and I'm hearing this in all sorts of professions and industries, that everybody's moving their conferences online for the same reason. That accessibility and that reach, there are people all over the world who we can connect with, learn from each other, support each other, build friendships, build relationships and working relationships that allow us to support these changes that we're all going through in the world, and hopefully leave the world in a better place than we found it. I think that would be a good aim to have.
I think that's an amazing aim to have, and one I'm sure that many people would share with you from that perspective. I mean, we certainly do, and you're right. I think it is. We are in different times, and I know, as you say, everybody thinks they're in times of great change, and it definitely feels at the moment that there are some huge shifts happening in the world, and it's our privilege to be a part of that. So thank you, Peter. It's been an absolute delight talking to you. Just to remind viewers, listeners, however you're observing this, Peter is presenting next year at the conference on Saturday, the 21st of May. We've got 3 hours of your presentation, which is a wonderful deep dive. It starts at 15:30. Which will be BST by then. So 15:30 BST on Saturday, the 21st of May. We're really looking forward to that. Thank you, Peter.
Thanks very much, Karen. I'm looking forward to seeing everybody there too as well.